I sat motionless, as if paralyzed, while my wife of 25 years explained to me why she was serving me with divorce papers. Her words sounded distant, like echoes in a cavern. My mind struggled to process the reality unfolding before me. Gary, are you listening to me? You look like you're in a daze. Pay attention, okay? This is important. I'm sorry, I muttered, shaking my head slightly as if to clear the fog. I was distracted for a moment. What were you talking about? The terms are simple. There is nothing to dispute. I'm not asking for anything. Do you hear that? Absolutely nothing. You keep the house, the cars, and all the money in the bank. If you sign this, it's all over in 3 months. Her words struck me like a sledgehammer. I didn't know what to say. Ella and I had been married since high school. We raised 2 beautiful twin daughters, Cindy and Sandy, who both went to Columbia University to study international banking. We had a nice house in the suburbs, and we both drove Volvos. Ella had her own credit cards and cell phone. I never denied her anything. I never cheated on her, never verbally or physically abused her. She never showed that she was unhappy or complained about anything. There was no way I could have prepared myself for this. I never noticed anything was wrong. Maybe that was the problem. I wasn't paying attention. I understand the mechanics of divorce, Ella, but can you tell me why? It's probably too late to do anything about it, but I'd like to know why. Ella sort of collapsed into the kitchen chair, her posture deflated. It was obvious that she didn't want to discuss the reasons and hoped I would just sign the papers and let her go. Just tell me briefly, Ella, I pleaded. What the hell did I do wrong? She sighed deeply, her eyes avoiding mine. Gary, it's not about what you did wrong. It's about what you didn't do. We became strangers living under the same roof. You were always busy, always preoccupied with work or the girls. We stopped communicating. I felt invisible, unappreciated. It wasn't one big thing. It was 1,000 little things that piled up over the years. I felt a lump forming in my throat, but I pushed it down, needing to understand. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you give me a chance to fix it? Ella's eyes finally met mine, and I saw the pain in them. I tried, Gary. Maybe not in words, but I tried to show you. I didn't want to hurt you. I kept hoping things would change, but they never did. I need to find myself again, and I can't do that while I'm still here, living this life. I sat there, absorbing her words, realizing how much I had missed, how disconnected I had become. The silence between us stretched out, filled with years of unspoken feelings. Okay, Ella, I said quietly, reaching for the pen. I'll sign the papers, but please, let's talk to Cindy and Sandy together. They deserve to hear it from both of us. Ella nodded, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. Thank you, Gary. I never wanted to hurt you. I just couldn't stay in a life that didn't feel like mine anymore. As I signed the papers, a wave of regret washed over me. I wished I had noticed sooner, wished I had been more attentive. But now, all I could do was let her go and hope that someday we could both find the happiness we had lost. You didn't do anything wrong, Gary. You were the perfect husband. Sometimes I hoped you'd screw up and I'd have an excuse to leave, but you never did. You were great at raising the kids and getting them through college. You always gave me everything I wanted, even if sometimes I was unreasonable. You bought me a beautiful house. My parents love you. Don't ever think you did anything wrong, because you didn't. Ella looked all of 45, with a nice complexion and perfect hair that was light brown and glistened in the sunlight. She jogged regularly, and her body was perfectly toned and tanned. On weekdays, she looked like a Land's End model, but when she needed to, she could be downright glamorous. Ella was as perfect as she claimed I was. I just couldn't figure out what was behind this sudden turn of events. I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling slightly. It doesn't make sense. There has to be a reason. You can't just say it's okay and then walk away. There has to be a reason. Gary, I'm trying to do this in a way that doesn't hurt your feelings or make me look bad. Why don't we just leave it at that? No, I insisted, feeling a surge of frustration and desperation. There has to be more to it. You owe me the truth, Ella. She took a deep breath, her eyes finally meeting mine with a mixture of regret and determination. Gary, I found someone else. He's a real estate developer. The words hung in the air, heavy and painful. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. A real estate developer? I echoed, struggling to process what she had just said. Yes, she continued, her voice steadier now. His name is Robert. We've been seeing each other for a while. I didn't mean for it to happen, but it did. He makes me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years. I stood there, numb and disbelieving. So that's it? You found someone else, and now you're leaving? Ella nodded slowly. I know it sounds terrible, but I need to do this for myself. I've felt so lost, and Robert has given me a sense of purpose and excitement that I've been missing. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Ella, we could have worked on it. We could have tried to rekindle what we had. She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. I'm sorry, Gary, I didn't mean to hurt you, but I've made up my mind. Please, just sign the papers and let me go. With a heavy heart, I picked up the pen and signed the divorce papers. As I did, I felt a part of my life slipping away. Ella watched me, tears streaming down her cheeks, and when it was done, she gave me a small, sad smile. Thank you, Gary. I hope you find happiness too. You deserve it. As she left, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. Our marriage was over, but perhaps in time, both of us could find the happiness we had lost. He has a stunning apartment overlooking the river and drives a sleek black Mercedes. He's handsome, wealthy, and completely infatuated with me. You were, and still are, a grocery clerk at the supermarket. I'm not belittling your job because you've always provided for us and earned enough to keep our family comfortable, but you will always be a grocery clerk. I wanted more than that. I couldn't see you offering me that kind of life. You were always content with what you were doing, never striving for more. It was disheartening. I was the manager of the grocery department, and you still saw me as a clerk. When I had the chance to advance my career and move out of town, I turned it down to keep our family together. And now look how I was repaid. It was painful, but not worth mentioning. Does this rich, good-looking guy have a name? Jake Manning. He's the president of Keystone Development Company. How long have you known him? 6 months. You slept with him? Ella sat up straight in the chair. Her eyes darted around the room before finally meeting mine. Yes. I was trying to avoid the subject, but since you insist on it, yes. I cheated on you. I was an adulteress. I was a whore. Are you happy now? I sat in silence for a while, then reached over, took the divorce papers, signed in 3 places, initialed twice, and handed them back to her across the table. I think he's better than I am. Sorry to disappoint you. As I got up to leave the room, Ella screamed, Hell no, that's not the reason. He wasn't better than you, just different. Don't you dare walk away believing that, Gary. Don't you dare. By then, I was already out the door. I had been so engrossed in my work and hobbies that I didn't even notice Ella gradually moving her things out of the house. By the time she handed me the papers, she had moved most of her clothes and personal belongings into Jake's apartment. She had thoughtfully left all the wedding and family photos behind so I could enjoy them in her absence. When I got back to the house, she was gone. Her Volvo was still in the driveway, and I figured she wouldn't need it anymore. She had left a power of attorney on the kitchen table to sell the house and car. I spent the rest of the night getting rid of the beer in the refrigerator, realizing that the deed was done. There was no turning back, and I didn't want to. Ella was gone, and it was clear she wasn't coming back. The next morning, I called work and took 3 months of overdue vacation. They had always been nagging me to take time off, so there was no problem. I had plenty of vacation and sick leave accumulated. I quickly called the girls at school, briefly explaining that Ella and I were breaking up but refused to give them any other details. They wanted to call Ella, but I didn't have her new phone number. With 3 months to pull myself together and decide what to do next, I disconnected the landline, changed my cell phone number, and canceled the one Ella had. The Volvo dealer gave me a low book value for Ella's car, which was fine by me. I had a high school friend, Terry Davis, who was now a real estate broker. He agreed to sell the house without a listing, at a low price and with a quick settlement. To ensure a clean break, I canceled all my credit cards and opened new bank accounts. I cashed in my life insurance policies. It was time to put the house in order. I went around the house and collected everything that could possibly belong to Ella. There was enough stuff to fill 3 trash bags. I packed the girls' personal belongings into boxes and stored them in the closet next to the house. I spent 3 hours sorting through family photos, putting all the girls' pictures in a box for them, and throwing away all the pictures of Ella. It was petty, I knew, but I didn't care. The main problem I faced was a lack of direction. I had no idea what I would do after 3 months. Would I stay here or leave? Would I keep working or find something new? I had two hobbies that occupied my time. I collected coins, mostly Indian head cents. They were easy to collect and readily available. I bought and sold them on eBay and enjoyed it. My second passion was geocaching, which gave me an excuse to get outside and get some exercise. Ella hated this activity because of the ticks, poison ivy, and having to walk. I didn't see how I could make a living from either of these activities. When I wasn't busy with my hobbies, I spent time reading the Wall Street Journal, trying to find some inspiration for my next move. Cindy and Sandy gave me a subscription to the Wall Street Journal every year for Christmas. Though I had no real interest in stocks and bonds, I devoured every article about farm commodities. I knew more about sugar, wheat, and corn than most market analysts. Of course, it was just a hobby. I had no money invested in any of it. I researched every bit of available information about Keystone Development and Jake Manning. Terry Davis was able to dig up even more details about Jake and his current projects than I could. He cross-checked some of the information with a friend of his who worked at a local commercial bank. I was eager to see what he would uncover. It had been 7 weeks. In all that time, I hadn't seen or heard from Ella. The girls called every week, but their mother remained silent. I had a feeling they were on my side, but Ella was their mother, and I knew they had to be supportive of her to some degree. During those weeks, I held a few yard sales and managed to unload a ton of stuff. I left enough furniture in the house to make it presentable to potential buyers. The process of decluttering and downsizing was oddly therapeutic. It felt like I was shedding the weight of the past, one item at a time. Every evening, after sorting through old memories and trinkets, I would sit down with a cold beer and think about what the future might hold. I started to realize that the pain of Ella's betrayal was slowly being replaced by a sense of liberation. For the first time in years, I felt like I could make choices based solely on what I wanted. One afternoon, Terry called with the information I had been waiting for. Jake Manning was not the paragon of virtue he appeared to be. His development projects were often embroiled in legal troubles, and there were whispers of financial improprieties. It seemed he had a knack for leaving a trail of broken promises and disillusioned investors in his wake. Armed with this information, I began to formulate a plan. I wasn't sure what I would do with it yet, but knowing that Ella had left me for a man with such a shady background was a small comfort. It wasn't about revenge, but rather a sense of vindication. I had always been honest and hardworking, and it was reassuring to know that Ella's new life might not be as glamorous as she imagined. In the meantime, I continued to focus on myself. I took long walks, delved deeper into my hobbies, and even started exploring new interests. I joined a local hiking group and found that the fresh air and exercise did wonders for my mood. The camaraderie of the group was also a welcome change from the solitude of the past few weeks. Slowly but surely, I was rebuilding my life. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of doubt and sadness, but each day felt a little brighter than the last. Ella might have moved on, but I was discovering that there was still plenty of life left to live and enjoy. Ella and Jake's picture was prominently featured in the society section of the Sunday paper. They were photographed at a political rally, clinking wine glasses with local dignitaries, their smiles wide and self-assured. A few more weeks drifted by, each one blurring into the next. Then Terry called with an offer on the house. It was significantly lower than the appraisal, but they promised to close the deal in 60 days, which was perfect for my plans. Terry also had an intriguing biography of Jake Manning and wanted to discuss it. We arranged to meet for lunch. I decided it was high time I got out of the house for a while. Hayes Mountain, a local gem for hiking and geocaching, beckoned. Although I had already found all the geocaches there, the mountain still had a few challenges left for me. 3 government-placed landmarks, used by surveyors and real estate developers to determine property boundaries, were scattered across the terrain. These landmarks, usually metal rods embedded in concrete, were a side quest for dedicated geocachers like myself. Equipped with my GPS and a metal detector, I set off with a renewed sense of purpose. Finding these markers wasn't easy. They often lay hidden beneath layers of soil and foliage. The GPS would guide me to the general vicinity, but the metal detector was essential for pinpointing the exact location. Much of Hayes Mountain was part of the Madison Land Trust, a sprawling 2,000-acre expanse, continually seeking donations to stave off encroaching developments. The adjacent land, where a picturesque orchard and farmhouse stood, bore a large "For Sale" sign. I parked my car and wandered over to the fence to take a closer look. It was disheartening to think that this beautiful estate might soon be bulldozed to make way for new construction. "Are you going to buy it or just look at it?" A voice suddenly interrupted my thoughts. Startled, I turned to see an elderly man approaching, his eyes twinkling with curiosity. He wore a weathered hat and carried a walking stick, looking every bit like a caretaker of the land. "I wish I could buy it," I replied, smiling. "It's a beautiful place." He nodded. "It is. Been in my family for generations, but times change, don't they?" I sensed a story behind his words, a history rooted deeply in this land. "I'm sorry to hear it's up for sale," I said. "I hope it finds a good owner." "Well, we'll see," he said, leaning on his stick. "Anyway, enjoy your hike. The mountain's got a lot to offer." With that, he tipped his hat and continued on his way. I stood there for a moment longer, taking in the view, before turning towards the trailhead. The mountain awaited, and with it, the promise of discovery. As I trekked up the slopes of Hayes Mountain, the air grew cooler, and the scent of pine and earth filled my lungs. The first landmark was easier to find than I had anticipated, thanks to the GPS. The metal detector buzzed as it passed over the rebar, buried beneath a thin layer of dirt. I marked the spot and took a few notes before moving on. The second landmark proved more elusive. The GPS led me to a rocky outcrop, and I spent nearly an hour sweeping the area with the metal detector. Just as I was about to give up, the detector emitted a sharp beep. I dug carefully, revealing the metal rod, its surface rusted, but still intact. Feeling accomplished, I took a break, sitting on a large rock and enjoying the serene beauty of the mountain. My mind wandered back to Ella and Jake, the glossy photo in the newspaper, and the life that once was. It still hurt, but being here, surrounded by nature, made it easier to bear. After a while, I set off to find the third and final landmark. It was located deeper in the forest, and the terrain became more challenging. I had to navigate through dense underbrush and over fallen logs. The GPS led me to a small clearing, where I began sweeping the ground with the metal detector. Minutes later, the detector buzzed, and I unearthed the last marker. I felt a rush of satisfaction, knowing I had accomplished my goal. As I stood there, looking at the metal rod jutting out from the ground, I realized how much I enjoyed these solitary pursuits. They provided a sense of purpose and fulfillment that I hadn't felt in a long time. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the landscape, I made my way back down the mountain. I felt lighter, the weight of the past few months lifting off my shoulders. Meeting Terry for lunch and discussing Jake Manning's background was now something I looked forward to, not as a step towards revenge, but as a way to understand and move on. Back in the parking lot, I glanced once more at the "For Sale" sign by the orchard. The old man's words lingered in my mind. Times do change, but sometimes they bring new opportunities. With renewed resolve, I climbed into my car and drove away, leaving the mountain and its secrets behind, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. I couldn't help but smile at the old man walking toward me. He was dressed in overalls, but instead of a straw hat, he was wearing a John Deere baseball cap. He introduced himself as John Smurd. "Well, if I had $1 million, I'd gladly take it from you," I said, grinning. We both laughed at that. "You won't have a problem selling it, will you?" I asked. "Well, I have people interested, but I try to hang on as long as possible," John replied. "Why?" I inquired, genuinely curious. "I was hoping the land trust would buy it, but they don't seem to have the money. They want to leave the fruit trees in their natural state, which is fine with me. It doesn't please the developers who want to bulldoze everything and plant new." I think it will be a great addition to what we have now, he explained. How can a land trust compete with the big companies? I wondered aloud. I've offered them a better deal. It's even listed at $1 million, but I'll give it to the trust for $600,000. Trouble is, they don't seem to be able to raise that amount right now. If they can't do it in 90 days, I'll have to take the option from that damn real estate developer. That son of a bitch calls me every week and I'm getting tired of him, John said with a hint of frustration. An option is not a sale, is it? I asked, trying to understand the situation better. No. The buyer purchases from me a promise to sell him the land in the next 6 months for $1 million. He pays $100,000 for the option. If he can't raise $1 million, he loses the option payment. It's a good deal for me, but I don't want him to get it. He has the $1 million under lock and key, so he'll be safe. The problem is that he needs to get all 6 properties for the deal to go through. That's why he's willing to pay more than the place is worth. John explained. What happens if you don't sell him the option? I asked, intrigued. He's going to lose his ass and more. Since the land trust can't raise the money, it looks like Keystone has a sure shot. However, if he doesn't get that lot, he'll lose the whole deal, including the money he paid for the options on the other 5 lots. That's probably around $1 million. His supporters will walk away and leave him hanging. If I had the money, I'd help you, John said with a sigh. Yeah, they all say that, I replied, feeling the weight of his predicament. As we stood there in the fading light, the orchard around us seemed to hum with life, a stark contrast to the cold machinations of real estate deals. It was a beautiful piece of land, and it deserved better than to be turned into another concrete wasteland. I felt a deep sense of empathy for John and the land trust's cause. This was more than just a business transaction. It was about preserving a piece of nature, a piece of history. We had another laugh, and I set off on my walk, with John's mention of Keystone still echoing in my mind. The landmarks were within a mile of each other, as the crow flies, but on the mountainous terrain, it was more like twice that distance. The first 2 markers were relatively easy to locate, typical surveyor's markers. However, the last marker proved to be much older and significantly harder to find. When I finally stumbled upon it, I discovered a small brick monument with a bronze plaque attached, buried under years of leaves and debris. I took a photo of it to post with the magazine. In that moment, my life took an unexpected turn. The metal detector, which was still on, began to beep faintly as I stepped away from the marker. Intrigued, I donned my headset and started scanning an area about 10 feet south of the landmark. After a few minutes, the detector pinpointed a target. Carefully, I began probing the ground. You don't typically find metal in the middle of the woods. Within 5 minutes, I had unearthed a small iron box wrapped in heavily oiled canvas. Although the surface was rusted, the box itself was sturdy, and the heavy bronze lock was still intact. Quite often, finds like this on public lands are considered treasures and must be turned over to the government or historical agencies. However, for some reason, that option didn't sit right with me today. I tucked the box into my bag and headed home, my mind racing with curiosity about its contents. Gold coins were the first thing that came to mind. Maybe it was filled with important documents from the Civil War or even earlier. The possibilities seemed endless, limited only by the size of the container. Back home, I cleared off the kitchen table, pulled out a cold Foster's, and set to work examining my find. I didn't want to damage the lock, but I couldn't figure out any other way to open it. Unsure if the lock mechanism was still functional, I decided it would have to be sacrificed. My bolt cutter made quick work of it. Inside the box was another piece of oiled canvas. Carefully unwrapping it, I found 12 pennies. But these were not ordinary pennies. They were old, large cents. The newest was dated 1814, and the oldest was from 1793. Despite their age, each coin's date was easily readable, and surprisingly, there was no green corrosion, which is typical for old copper coins. I had never delved into collecting large cents, preferring instead to invest in newer Indian head cents, believing I could get more value for my money. As I stared at the coins, I couldn't help but marvel at their condition and wonder about the person who had buried them here. The discovery felt like a piece of history brought to life, a tangible connection to the past. I knew I had stumbled upon something special, something that might just change the course of my life. However, I did have a book my grandfather left me called The Quirks of the Penny. It detailed the different types and varieties of large cent coins. I had always found it boring since I didn't own any of the coins it described. It had been sitting on a shelf, gathering dust for almost 30 years. But tonight, it would finally find its purpose. I stayed up until dawn with my grandfather's book and a magnifying glass. My scanner produced high-resolution photos of each coin. Every crack and scratch was perfectly visible, showcasing the remarkable condition of each coin. I fell asleep around sunrise and didn't wake up until noon. When I called work to check in, they informed me that Phil Williams, one of the company executives, had inquired about me. They didn't have any further information, and I didn't pursue it. My mind was occupied with other pressing concerns. I realized I needed a safe deposit box at the bank to securely store my valuable coins. After spending a few hours researching online, I discovered that my pennies were worth several $1,000,000. It wasn't just their age, it was their pristine condition and the specific varieties of the stamps that made them so valuable. Understanding why drug dealers go to great lengths to launder money suddenly made sense. There was no easy way to convert my precious coins into hard cash. It would take considerable effort and strategy. While having breakfast at IHOP, I noticed another picture of Ella and Jake in the paper, attending the opening of a new art gallery. She was wearing a sleek black cocktail dress and holding a glass of wine or champagne. They were both beaming at the camera. As I stared at the photo, a clear plan began to form in my mind. After securing the safe deposit box, I called John Smurd and asked him to hold off on making any decisions about the land for a few days. He seemed satisfied with the request. Then, I visited the Land Trust office to inquire about making a donation to their organization. They were more than happy to assist me. We were 4 weeks away from the finalization of the divorce. For some reason, I felt that deadline was crucial. I spent the rest of the day researching coin dealers and auction houses, not for advertisements, but for lawsuits. I needed to ensure that the people I would be dealing with were reputable and trustworthy. The gravity of my situation was starting to sink in. I had discovered a treasure worth millions, but turning that treasure into a new future required careful planning and execution. As I delved deeper into my research, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I could finally take control and shape my destiny. Eventually, I settled on Towers and Burns in New York City. They had a solid financial standing and a reputation for handling controversial sales with finesse and discretion. I scheduled an appointment with them for Monday afternoon. Knowing that my daughters were in the city, I called Cindy and Sandy to keep Monday morning free so we could enjoy lunch together. The facade of the Towers and Burns office was like a chic showroom, adorned with plenty of glass and bathed in light. The display cases showcased an impressive variety of collectibles, and the walls were decorated with numismatic paraphernalia. After giving my last name, I was escorted to a less glamorous part of the building, where serious business took place. "Welcome to New York, Mr. Simmons," greeted James Towers as he rose to shake my hand. His photo in the advertisement portrayed a younger man, but the years had added a touch of gravitas to his appearance. "I understand you have some interesting coins to show us. Is this your first time in the city?" he asked, gesturing for me to sit. "Thank you. My daughters attend Columbia University, so I've been here before, but never for business," I replied, settling into the straight-backed chair across from him. "I'm not questioning your coin expertise, but do you have a specialist in early copper coins on your staff? If so, I think their presence would be quite beneficial." James Towers nodded, his expression serious. "I'm not that sensitive, and I think that's a good idea too." He leaned over to the intercom on his desk. "Marie, please have Cookson come into my office." As we waited, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This was the moment I had been preparing for, and the stakes were high. The value of my coins, the mystery of their origins, and my future plans all hinged on this meeting. In walked a man who seemed to embody the very essence of a coin expert. With a tweed jacket and glasses perched on the end of his nose, he introduced himself as Cookson, the resident specialist in early American copper coins. "Mr. Simmons, it's a pleasure to meet you," Cookson said, his eyes twinkling with curiosity. "James has told me you have some remarkable pieces." "Indeed, I do," I replied, opening the case that contained my precious coins. "These coins have been in my family for generations, and I believe they hold significant value." Cookson's eyes widened as he examined the coins, meticulously inspecting each one with a magnifying glass. "These are extraordinary," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone in the room. "The condition, the dates, everything about them is impeccable." James Towers leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. "Mr. Simmons, I think you've brought us something truly special. We'll make sure these coins are given the attention they deserve." As the meeting continued, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I was in the right place with the right people. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I could move forward with confidence and leave the past behind. Maurice Cookson had published several authoritative guides on large cents and half cents, and his expertise was well regarded in the numismatic community. It was reassuring to have such an accessible expert. Notably, Mr. Cookson also appeared older than his published photographs, a reminder that no one enjoys looking their age. "Gentlemen, I have 12 exceptional coins that I'm offering for sale," I began, feeling the weight of the moment. "I plan to sell 4 of them today and keep a 5th for your appraisal. The remaining 7 will be offered at a later date. If today goes well, I will consider selling them to you as well." I paused, gauging their reactions. I know it seems improbable, but I believe 6 of the coins might achieve census condition status. I trust Mr. Cookson can verify whether my assessment is accurate. James Towers leaned forward, curiosity evident in his eyes. "Where did these coins come from?" "My grandfather left them to me when he passed away," I replied, hoping to quell any skepticism. Maurice Cookson, though clearly intrigued, couldn't hide a slight frown. "I don't mean to offend, Mr. Simmons, but such a collection is almost too good to be true. What can you show us?" I spread 4 enlarged photographs on the table, each meticulously capturing the obverse and reverse of one of the coins I intended to sell today. The images, 5 times the normal size, were crisp and detailed. James and Maurice studied each photo intently for several minutes. Finally, James spoke, his voice measured. "What valuation have you come up with for these 4? Based on recent auction results, I estimate their collective value to be around $1.3 million, I stated confidently. "Though I initially thought closer to $1 million, your expertise might suggest otherwise." Maurice nodded, his eyes gleaming with knowledge. "Your figure isn't far off the mark. I only want $800,000 for the lot," I continued, "but there's a condition attached." James leaned back, a curious smile playing on his lips. "How special are we talking?" I pulled out a letter from the Madison Land Trust and an advertisement for John Smurd's orchard. "I want you to purchase this piece of land and donate it to the Madison Land Trust. The price is $600,000. You'll get a significant tax deduction and the added benefit of being seen as humanitarians. I would take the remaining $200,000 in cash." James and Maurice exchanged a glance before retreating to the far end of the room for a hushed conversation. After a few minutes, Maurice left, and James returned to the table. "Do you have any coins with you?" James asked. "Yes," I confirmed, revealing the 5th coin I intended to leave with them for appraisal. Maurice re-entered the room, carrying a purple Crown Royal bag, his expression more solemn now. He carefully opened the bag and began to speak. "I've examined many coins in my career, Mr. Simmons, but these are extraordinary. Let's proceed with the appraisal of the 5th coin while we finalize the terms of your proposal." With that, the atmosphere in the room shifted from cautious skepticism to genuine excitement. We were on the brink of a significant transaction, one that promised to reshape not just my financial future, but the landscape of the Madison Land Trust as well. "We are willing to honor your terms on the first part of the deal and hope you can honor ours on the second part," James Towers declared with a confident smile. He then emptied the purple packet onto the desktop, revealing almost 100 different coins, mostly gold, but with a few silver ones sprinkled in. The sight of the shimmering collection was breathtaking. This collection is valued at around $300,000, James continued. For a number of reasons that we won't discuss, it's difficult for us to sell them directly. However, you won't have any trouble. I understand you've sold coins on eBay before. Is that correct? I simply nodded, my mind racing with possibilities. These coins, inherited from your grandfather, should sell easily, and we will both benefit from the arrangement, he assured me with a knowing wink. I mulled it over for a moment and then agreed. The opportunity was too good to pass up. I handed over the 4 pennies to Mr. Towers, and we all shook hands, sealing the deal. Now, Mr. Simmons, tell us about this 5th coin, James prompted, his curiosity clearly piqued. I held the photograph in my hand and looked directly at Mr. Cookson. What's the highest-rated 1793 strawberry leaf you've ever seen? I've never actually seen one in person, Cookson admitted, his voice tinged with excitement. But I believe the highest grade recorded is fair 12. I rated this one at an 8, but I'm not a professional, I said, noting that Cookson's eyes were locked on mine, his interest intensifying. Both men tried to get a better look at the photograph I was holding. Cookson's smile broadened, and I could practically see dollar signs in Towers' eyes. How much? Towers asked, his voice barely concealing his anticipation. Best offer, if you can figure out how to pay me, I replied. Would you like a cup of coffee, Mr. Simmons? James offered, his demeanor polite but clearly eager to proceed. Of course, black would be just fine, I responded. Both men left the room with the photograph, and a few minutes later, a young woman brought me a steaming cup of coffee. Mr. Towers will be with you in a few minutes. He has some phone calls to make. Will you be okay? She asked, her tone courteous. I nodded, taking a sip of the coffee. It was strong and invigorating, just what I needed. 30 minutes passed before James returned, accompanied by an absolutely stunning woman. She had dark eyes, raven hair, and an air of authority that was impossible to ignore. Her appearance was striking, with what seemed to be Middle Eastern features. She looked no older than 30, impeccably dressed, and exuding confidence. Hello, my name is Kaylee Rothberg, she introduced herself, her voice smooth and commanding. Do you have a passport, Mr. Simmons? I was taken aback by the question. Yes, I do. Why do you ask? Excellent, she said, her smile both mysterious and reassuring. We may need to arrange for some international transactions, and having your passport will expedite the process. Now let's discuss the logistics of your 5th coin and how we can best assist you. The room buzzed with a sense of anticipation and intrigue as the reality of the situation began to sink in. This was no ordinary coin transaction. It was the start of something far more significant and potentially life-changing. Her voice was deep, yet undeniably feminine. Yes, good. We'll be traveling to JFK shortly to set up a new offshore bank account for you. Do you have anything to give to Mr. Towers? I handed James the 1793 strawberry, and his eyes lit up like a child on Christmas morning. Thank you, he exclaimed, practically skipping out of the room. We hadn't agreed on a price yet, but I still had 7 coins that Towers desperately wanted. Mr. Towers agreed to hold the small bag of coins until I returned. An hour later, Kaylee and I were already settled on a plane bound for the Cayman Islands. She hardly spoke, keeping an air of mystery about her. When we landed, several photographers swarmed, eager to capture her image. She appeared annoyed yet maintained a sweet smile, further piquing my curiosity about her. It was my first experience flying first class, and it ended far too soon. Awaiting us at the terminal was a bright yellow mini SUV. Kaylee didn't hesitate to hike her skirt up to her hips as she slid into the driver's seat. My cheeks flushed with embarrassment as she caught me stealing glances at her tanned legs, but she seemed more amused than offended. 20 minutes later, we arrived at the lower level of a mid-sized condominium building. Kaylee Rothberg owned the entire building, but used the top floor as her personal apartment. Can I get you anything, Mr. Simmons? She asked. A beer would be nice, I replied. Watching her leave the room was as captivating as catching a glimpse of her leg at the terminal. It's not typical for me to be so captivated by a young woman, but Kaylee Rothberg was an exception. We stepped out onto a small balcony overlooking the ocean. The view was stunning, though the wind was a bit too strong for my liking. Perhaps she was trying to impress me with the grandeur of her residence. It was undoubtedly beautiful, but my thoughts were preoccupied with the new bank account I was about to establish. "You don't talk very much, Mr. Simmons. Surely you have a few questions you'd like answered?" she said, breaking the silence. It struck me as odd that a woman of her class and position would drink beer straight from the bottle. I had imagined her with a flute of champagne or a martini in hand. I wondered how she maintained such a figure with her taste for beer. "I usually think it's best to wait, but I guess you could tell me why we needed to come here to open a bank account," I said, trying to break the ice. "It's a simple, safe, and secure place to get money. I think it will work well for you," she replied. "It's just one coin," I protested. "Yes, but you have 7 more," she reminded me with a knowing smile. "I'm sorry, but that still seems excessive," I insisted. To my relief, we returned indoors, escaping the relentless wind. The opulence of her home was not lost on me, but my mind remained focused on the task at hand. Kaylee's enigmatic presence added an unexpected twist to what had already been an extraordinary day. "Can you accept this? I brought you here to be my sex slave for a few days." I couldn't help but smile at the unexpected comment. I knew immediately it was nonsense, but the humor in it was undeniable. She had a quick wit, looked fantastic, and was incredibly wealthy. What more could a man dream of? If only I were 10 years younger. It's no good teasing an old man. We both laughed lightly at the situation. "Come on, Mr. Simmons, let's go get some fresh lobsters for dinner." We finished our long necks and headed out the door. The restaurant and food were exceptional. I didn't particularly enjoy the wine the hostess chose, but I tried to be gracious. It didn't work. "What's wrong with the wine, Mr. Simmons?" she asked, clearly noticing my discomfort. Was I that obvious? "I'm sorry. It was unintentional, a kind of reflex action. When I was 18, I got drunk on cheap white wine like a dog. I've never been so miserable before or since. Every time I smell or taste white wine, I feel nauseous. I can't explain it. It's good wine, but don't worry about it." 5 minutes later, we had 2 cold long necks. Oddly enough, there was little conversation during the meal. At the end, we each had a fruit sorbet and drank coffee. "Tell me about yourself. Are you married? Do you have children? What do you do for a living? It's late at night, and I'm dying to know what brought us together." "It's a lot of questions," she said. "I have 2 daughters. Both of them are at Columbia University studying international banking or something like that. I don't really know. I just pay the tuition." "That's interesting. I have a master's degree from Columbia University and am one of their guest lecturers. I might have met them. Did you see them this morning?" she asked. "We had lunch together. They hate it when I make them skip class," I replied. "You must have gotten married early since you have 2 girls in college," she remarked, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. "That sounds like a phrase a guy could use," I said, smiling. She laughed, a melodic sound that seemed to fill the room with warmth. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of laughter and conversation, the initial awkwardness giving way to a surprising and genuine connection. By the time we parted ways, I couldn't help but feel that this unexpected adventure was just beginning. I felt at ease with this Mediterranean beauty, as if we could have talked endlessly through the night. "I am currently estranged from my wife," I confessed. "That's a strange word," I thought, never imagining I'd use it in this context. "She left me for a wealthy wheeler dealer. I think he builds shopping malls or business complexes. Anyway, he's got a fancy car and a big apartment. She told me she's decided to switch. The divorce will be final in about 4 weeks." "That's a stupid reason to leave a good marriage," she replied, her eyes reflecting genuine empathy. "I guess everything was fine until she met this guy. She was never happy with my choice of work. I had several opportunities to advance my career, but she refused to move forward. I wasn't thrilled about it, but decided it was necessary to save the marriage. Now I feel like nothing." "And what do you do?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. There was an awkward pause. "How do you tell a beautiful, rich, successful woman that you work as a grocery manager at a supermarket?" She noticed my discomfort and reacted accordingly. "It's not important. We can talk about it later." "No," I insisted. "It's okay. I'm not ashamed of what I do. It's just that being a supermarket grocery manager isn't the kind of job that impresses the ladies. It doesn't bother my daughters, but my wife often purposely forgot to mention it in conversation. I could tell it was bothering her." Do you like what you do? She asked, leaning in with genuine interest. Yes, and I'm good at it. The server brought more coffee and cleared the table. Mr. Simmons, I realize you've only known me for a short time, but I believe that first impressions are very important. Very briefly, what is your first impression of me? The question put me in an awkward position. If I answered honestly, I might push her away, and if I tried to butter her up, I was sure she would see right through it and think I was a liar. What to do? In short, I see you as beautiful, intelligent, educated, and confident, I said, watching her reaction closely. Her head tilted down slightly, and her eyes looked up at me, a small smirk playing on her lips. I was hoping for candor, she said softly, her smirk turning into a genuine smile. I mean it, I continued, encouraged by her reaction. You seem like someone who knows what she wants and isn't afraid to go after it. That's impressive. Thank you, Gary, she replied, her voice warm and sincere. And for what it's worth, I think being good at what you do is far more impressive than having a fancy title. We sat there, enjoying each other's company, the night stretching out before us, full of possibilities. I'm sorry, but we were having such a pleasant evening. I didn't want to spoil it, I began, my voice tinged with regret. Do you really have such a bad opinion of me? Kaylee's eyes locked onto mine, searching for sincerity. I don't want you to resent me, I confessed, feeling a weight lift slightly off my chest. Maybe that's why your wife left you for another man. If you hadn't always tried to please her, your marriage would have been stronger. Her words cut deep, and although harsh, they held a kernel of truth that was hard to ignore. Miss Rothberg, I believe you are cunning and manipulative. You use your beauty and charm to get what you want. You are used to getting your way, and I feel you are a bit of a spoiled brat. You play with men, but are afraid of commitment. From the looks of it, you know how to make money and invest it wisely. If you weren't so obsessed with wanting to prove that you're as good as any man, you'd probably make a good mother. I felt a pang of discomfort after saying that, but her comment about my marriage had struck a nerve. For a few moments, we just sat there, staring at each other, the tension palpable. Do you really think I'd be a good mother? She asked, her tone softening. The mood suddenly improved dramatically, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. During the short drive back to the condo, things were pleasant again. I knew she had heard everything I said, but she seemed to accept it without argument. She had wanted the truth, and I gave it to her. The fact that she wasn't upset made me feel better about being honest with her. My night as Kaylee Rothberg's sex slave turned out to be a little boring. It's hard to have sex in separate bedrooms. That was okay, because I wasn't expecting anything anyway. The next morning, I got up first and found a breakfast of fruit, danishes, and hot coffee waiting for me, along with a copy of the Wall Street Journal. The wind had died down, and I enjoyed relaxing on the balcony overlooking the Caribbean. I could get used to this. Kaylee joined me about 20 minutes later and jokingly snatched up part of the paper. We sat in silence, reading and sipping coffee as if we'd been doing it for years. I had known this woman for less than 24 hours, but everything about her felt natural and comfortable. I'm afraid my phone doesn't work here, and I really want to call my daughters, I mentioned, breaking the tranquil silence. Kaylee held out her cell phone to me. Be my guest. I dialed quickly. Cindy, it's Daddy. Where are you? Is everything okay? Cell phone says London. I'm in the Caymans, and everything is fine. I just thought I should let you know, since I didn't go straight home, that I'm staying with a friend. I had to use her phone. I could hear the relief in Cindy's voice as she responded, and it felt good to reassure her. As I handed Kaylee's phone back, I realized how much my life had changed in such a short amount of time. The future felt uncertain, but for the first time in a while, I felt ready to face it head-on. They showed a picture of you on TV last night, Cindy said, her voice tinged with surprise and concern. They showed you getting on an airplane with Kaylee Rothberg. What the hell are you doing with Kaylee Rothberg? It's the friend I'm staying with. What's the big deal? I responded, trying to keep my tone light and casual. Why are you with her? Everything's fine. Nothing insidious is going on. I don't understand your concern. Dad, that woman is a barracuda. She eats men for breakfast. At that moment, Kaylee walked in, bringing a tray of breakfast from the balcony. She looked every bit the elegant hostess, and as she walked by, I couldn't resist a little mischief. "This is my daughter Cindy. She's in New York. She told me to be careful because you're a barracuda." Sure enough, Cindy heard me say this to Kaylee and let out a loud groan over the phone. I could make out Cindy and Sandy discussing something quickly on the other end. "Why are you there? How do you know her? When are you coming home?" Cindy's questions came rapid fire, her concern evident. Before I could answer any of her questions, Kaylee was already standing with her hand outstretched, waiting for me to hand her the phone. "Hi, Cindy, it's Kaylee. Your father told me about you and your sister. I'll be in New York tomorrow and would like to have lunch with you two. Where can I pick you up?" Of course, there was no way I could have known the other side of this conversation. I imagined the confusion and surprise on Cindy's face as Kaylee took control of the situation. "Who is this professor?" I heard her ask. Pause. "No problem. I'll pick you up from the classroom at 11. Okay, I'll tell you goodbye. Bye." Kaylee handed me back my phone with a satisfied smile. "Your daughter said goodbye. I'll have lunch with them tomorrow. I promise to be nice, even though they think I'm a fish." She giggled lightly, wiggling her hips as she walked to her room. An hour later, we arrived at the Federal Reserve Bank of the Cayman Islands. Under Kaylee's experienced guidance, I set up my first offshore bank account. 20 minutes later, I saw that my new account had been credited with $4 million from Towers and Burns. The surreal nature of the situation hit me as I looked at the balance. Kaylee's charm and efficiency had turned what could have been a nerve-wracking experience into a smooth process. Despite Cindy's warnings, I found myself increasingly captivated by this extraordinary woman. I figured that was a fair price for 215 pennies. After dinner, Kaylee arranged for us to have an adventure, taking us to feed manta rays with a friend of hers. During dinner, curiosity got the better of me, and I finally asked her why she worked for a firm like Towers and Burns. To my surprise, she revealed that she owned 60% of the company. "What else can you tell me about yourself? Apparently, you're a major player on the global financial scene, and I'm embarrassed to say that I don't know anything about you." She took a sip of her wine, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "I was born and raised in London. My father is Israeli and my mother is Turkish. I have an MBA from Columbia University. I am not married, but I have been engaged twice. I haven't had a serious relationship in over 3 years. I've learned not to trust men who show interest in me. I guess you could say I'm cynical, but I feel like most of them want something from me but have nothing to offer in return." "That's unfortunate. I was hoping to get a ride back to the condo. Does that mean you don't trust me?" She laughed, a melodic sound that drew the attention of the surrounding tables. "You need to take this seriously, you big jerk. I'm sorry if I came across as insensitive. I didn't mean to be. I guess it's hard for me to relate to your problem. I'll try to be better." She softened, her smile returning. "Okay, let's relax. We have a party to go to." The evening ended at a cocktail party at a major hotel. Everyone knew Kaylee and treated her like a celebrity. I spent the evening trying to remain as inconspicuous as possible, still wearing the street clothes I had worn in New York. I hadn't anticipated traveling to the tropics. At first, Kaylee seemed obliged to accompany me, but I persuaded her to enjoy herself and let me blend into the background where I felt more comfortable. She did her best, but for most of the night, she constantly checked on me. I found myself chatting with a couple of Hispanic gentlemen, cattle ranchers from Argentina. The conversation started with soccer and then moved on to fishing. At least the conversation was in English, likely for my benefit. One of them remarked on how attractive Kaylee looked, not realizing I was her chaperone for the evening. I felt a little flattered. My contribution to the chatter consisted mostly of smiles and nods. I wasn't knowledgeable enough about any of the topics to add anything of substance until Ramon Duarte brought up the topic of investments. He was interested in winter wheat. "Ah, finally something I could talk about." "Winter wheat is a fascinating crop," I began, and Ramon's eyes lit up with interest. "The key is to understand the cycles and the impact of weather patterns on the yields." We dove into a spirited discussion about agricultural investments, and I felt a sense of satisfaction as I realized I had something valuable to contribute. The night turned out to be more enjoyable than I had anticipated, and I even managed to make a few new acquaintances. As the party wound down, Kaylee found me and gently pulled me aside. "You did well tonight, blending in and making connections," she said, her smile genuine. "Thanks, I had a good time," I admitted. "Let's get back to the condo," she suggested. "Tomorrow is another day, and I have a feeling it's going to be interesting." I nodded, looking forward to what lay ahead. Life with Kaylee Rothberg was turning out to be quite the adventure. I listened as Ramon elaborated on why he planned to invest a significant amount of his wealth in something he clearly had little knowledge about. He spoke with confidence, but it was apparent he didn't grasp the intricacies of the matter. I usually pride myself on maintaining a poker face, but this time I must have given myself away. "Mr. Simmons, I can see by the look on your face that you disagree with me about investing in winter wheat." Caught off guard, I realized my invisibility cloak had failed me. I had intended to remain unnoticed, but now I was squarely in the spotlight. "I'm sorry, Ramon. I'm afraid I'm not an investor, and I don't understand the complexity of this case." I called him by his first name, trying to appear casual despite my discomfort. "Maybe so, but I have a feeling you have an opinion on the matter. I'm going to pester you until you share it with us." I was trapped, and my attempt at a small smile probably looked more like a grimace. "I need a fresh drink," I muttered, hoping for a brief reprieve. For the next hour, the two gentlemen listened intently as an Alabama greengrocer, me explained the nuances of the winter wheat market. I detailed how the excellent winter wheat crop in Alberta and Saskatchewan would more than compensate for the poor harvest in the States. The Canadian Grain Board had leased all available silos in North and South Dakota to store the surplus and even reserved rail cars for short-term storage. Within a week, winter wheat futures will begin to fall and will continue to drop until the market stabilizes. Both Canada and the States will be forced to unload wheat overseas, I explained. I was running out of clever words when Kaylee approached our group. Ramon and his friend were flattered by her presence and genuinely surprised when she grabbed my hand and led me away. "What the hell was that, Gary? We were just talking about food, about groceries." She smiled slightly as we left to head back to the condo. The next morning, we flew back to New York, where a group of photographers eagerly awaited her arrival. A courier from Towers and Burns handed me a small package containing the coins I had left behind. Kaylee and I exchanged goodbyes, and I headed to the commuter train terminal for my flight back to Huntsville. The divorce and the sale of the house proceeded as planned. Phil Williams from the main office had left several messages asking me to call him. They once again asked me to consider moving to the company's headquarters in New York, and this time, I agreed. John Smurd had also left a message. His tone suggested urgency, and I was curious to see what he had to say. Back in Huntsville, I felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. The chapters of my life were closing and new ones were opening. I had a feeling that, despite the upheaval, better things were on the horizon. He wanted to meet for lunch, so I tucked myself away in my locker at work and wished my shifters good luck as I headed out. That morning's paper had a picture of Jake and Ella at a barbecue for a local politician. They looked every bit the perfect couple, smiling and holding hands. It took me an entire day to meticulously scan and identify all the coins from the bag I'd brought back from New York. With just 3 weeks left until the finalization of the divorce, I decided it was high time to put those coins on eBay. I knew everything would be fine as long as they didn't attract any unsavory buyers. The task of posting the coin ads and preparing all the envelopes and shipping labels consumed another full day. All the money flowed into my PayPal account, and from there, it was transferred to my new offshore bank. With the hard work done, I finally had the weekend to myself. My Friday lunch with John Smurd proved to be quite interesting. John was ecstatic that I had managed to get Jake involved in a financial setback, but he was a bit displeased that I hadn't reaped any direct benefit from the deal. Explaining the intricacies to him was too complicated, so I let it slide. Lunch went smoothly, and before he left, John handed me the deeds to 5 acres of land on the outskirts of town. He and his wife were relocating to Florida and wanted to settle their affairs before the move. It was true. No good deed goes unrewarded. Shortly after parting ways with John, my cell phone rang. Cindy and Sandy were arriving in Nashville in 2 hours. With plenty of time to spare, I set off to pick them up. The airfare to Nashville was half the price of a direct flight to Huntsville, and the girls were on a tight budget. Picking them up was no trouble at all. Cindy was practically buzzing with excitement about Kaylee. "Dad, you won't believe it." The lecture hall was packed with over 300 students for an advanced corporate finance course. In the middle of the lecture, the professor paused to introduce Kaylee to the class. She just walked in like she owned the place, spoke for about 10 minutes, and then said she needed 2 students to join her for lunch at the Westin Hotel. We couldn't believe it when she called our names. "So you liked her?" I asked, amused by her enthusiasm. "She's amazing, Dad. How the hell did you manage to meet her?" I couldn't resist a little joke. "Well, she said she was looking for a sex slave, and I was her first choice." Sandy rolled her eyes and tapped me on the shoulder. "This isn't funny. Be serious, okay?" "What did you talk about at lunch?" I asked, genuinely curious. Cindy replied, "She asked about our classes and schoolwork." Sandy chuckled lightly, adding, "She had a lot of questions about you, Dad." Cindy and I both agree that she seemed interested in more than just friendship. I laughed. I'm 10 years older than her and a couple of dollars poorer. I doubt she's interested in more than just being nice. But deep down, I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to Kaylee's interest than met the eye. "I'm sorry, girls, but she's totally out of my league," I said, shaking my head in disbelief. "Daddy, she can have any man she wants. Why you?" Cindy asked, her eyes searching mine for an answer. "Think about it and give us a clue. From our point of view, you're perfect, but Kaylee Rothberg doesn't know you like we do." "Apparently, your mother didn't know me either," I muttered, almost to myself. Everything went quiet for a few minutes. My remark about their mother landed like a punch in the gut. It was not my intention to turn my daughters against their mother, and I regretted saying it almost immediately. "I'm sorry, girls. That didn't come out right. Your mother is a wonderful woman, and I have no right to say that." "Don't worry about it, Dad. We understand more than you think," Sandy said softly, trying to ease the tension. We drove in silence for a few miles, each of us lost in our own thoughts. As we crossed the Alabama state line, Sandy's cell phone buzzed, breaking the quiet. "Hello," she answered, pausing to listen. "We arrived about an hour ago. Everything's fine." Another pause. "You're kidding." Her eyes widened. "That sounds great. I'll tell him. Thanks for the call. Bye." In the rearview mirror, I saw Sandy giving Cindy a thumbs-up sign. "What was that about?" I asked, curiosity piqued. Sandy leaned over the front seat, her face alight with excitement. "Guess what, Daddy? Kaylee is coming to Huntsville Tuesday morning. She said you have to pay her for the night and that she expects breakfast in bed." I was flattered by the news, but also felt the pressure mounting from Kaylee and now my daughters. It all sounded wonderful, and I hoped I was up to the task, and not just for this one encounter. The weekend with the girls was fantastic. They spent Saturday afternoon with their mom, but didn't get to meet Jake. I asked them not to mention Kaylee, wanting to keep things uncomplicated. We sorted through all the things they wanted to leave at the house. By the time they left, we had everything organized. I made an upfront payment to store their belongings until they finished school. As we drove back to Nashville, the conversation turned back to Kaylee. They made me promise to try to be companionable with her. When I asked what they meant, Cindy smiled and said, "Just don't make her mad, Dad." I laughed, feeling a bit more at ease. "I'll do my best. Thanks for the advice, girls." As we approached the airport, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Kaylee Rothberg was coming to Huntsville, and I had no idea what to expect. But for the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of excitement about what the future might hold. That was simple enough, I thought to myself with a satisfied grin. They were thrilled about my move to town, almost as if it was a long-anticipated event in their otherwise mundane lives. I still couldn't quite wrap my head around what Kaylee wanted from an old man who didn't even own an Armani suit. She was a mystery I couldn't solve. When I finally got home, it was my time to unwind with a cold beer and the Sunday paper. This week, there were no pictures of Ella and Jake gracing the pages, but a short story about Keystone Development struggling to finance a local project caught my eye. The news about winter wheat futures plummeting to a record low was fascinating. I picked up the phone and called Terry Davis, asking him to come over. It wasn't lunchtime, but I figured we could hash things out over a couple of beers. Jake Manning had a checkered past, to put it mildly. Over the past few years, his fortunes had swung wildly from riches to rags and back again. He had spent a considerable amount of time trying to stay one step ahead of creditors and so-called friends who had lent him money. Now his latest venture was crumbling, and his supporters and investors were vanishing like smoke in the wind. I don't think I had ever enjoyed a beer as much as I did that evening. Monday morning arrived with unexpected positivity. The coins I had put up for auction sold for much more than I had anticipated. Cookson estimated their value at around $300,000. While it didn't look like they would fetch that much, they might have gone over $200,000. In just over 2 weeks, I would be a free man. 3 months ago, the thought of this would have seemed catastrophic, but today, I was eagerly looking forward to it. The people who bought the house had secured their financing and were ready to close the deal. It amused me that Ella felt so at ease with Jake that she didn't need any of our shared possessions. I wondered if she realized how precarious her future was. At 3 o'clock, I met with the new homeowners. A check for $200,000 went straight into my offshore account. They didn't mind me staying in the house for another week, which suited both parties perfectly. The next morning, I received a call before I even had my first sip of coffee. A mysterious voice informed me that Miss Rothberg would be arriving at 10:45 a.m. on Delta Flight 724. I arrived at the airport 30 minutes early, a bit on edge. The paparazzi had gotten wind of her arrival and were already stationed outside the terminal. I tried my best to blend in, parking my car in the short-term lot since I wasn't expecting such a fuss. Instead of waiting for me to pick her up at the curb, she decided to walk with me back to the car. Naturally, the photographers noted my license plate, and just like that, our cover was blown. I'm not used to such a fuss, but Kaylee didn't seem the least bit embarrassed by it. Her nonchalance was almost enviable. On the way home, she apologized to me for the commotion, but I couldn't help but remember the moment she stepped off the airplane. All I wanted to do was kiss her. Stupid old man. I was embarrassed by the sparseness of the house. Over the past few months, I had gotten rid of everything I could, paring down to only the essentials. The only things left were the necessities that the new owner had agreed to take responsibility for after I left. Kaylee seemed amused by my fumbling attempts to apologize for the bare surroundings. There was nothing in the house to eat, so we made a quick stop at the local Taco Bell. Her choice, naturally. I promised her Dreamland ribs for dinner, though. It was refreshing to be around a woman with a healthy appetite. "Kaylee, I'm glad you're here, but I don't understand why," I confessed, curiosity getting the better of me. "I assumed you'd be back to business." "This is business, silly," she replied with a knowing smile. "I understand you're moving to New York next week. You need a place to stay, and I have a spare bedroom. I'm here to help you pack. A truck will be here tomorrow morning to move anything you can't fit in the car. Just no furniture, please." "How did you know I was moving?" I asked, still processing her sudden involvement. "That's what I do," she said cryptically. "If I keep my eye on the little things, the big things come by themselves." It's a load of crap, but that's what I've always wanted to say. "Are you conspiring with my daughters?" I joked, attempting an innocent grin, though it was hard for an old man to appear sly. Her offer was unexpected, but I couldn't think of a single reason to refuse it. "Sure, now let's get some boxes so we can pack." I had thought she would have been more comfortable sitting in a boardroom or a bank somewhere, but she seemed to enjoy just talking to me. Even so, I felt a bit awkward about the age difference. We ended up throwing out more stuff than we packed. She had a strong opinion about my closet and refused to listen to my pleas for mercy. Once I was settled in New York, she promised to take me shopping for some appropriate clothes. When we finished, there were more boxes than could fit in my car, but not enough for a moving van. I hoped she'd ordered a small truck. Setting aside my laptop and small inkjet printer, I turned my attention to an eBay auction. Just as we were getting ready for dinner, a new surprise awaited us. A delivery van was parked in front of the house. Kaylee and I watched as the driver, dressed in a smart uniform, stepped down from the cab with a clipboard. "Are you Gary Simmons?" "Yes," I replied, a bit wary. "I have a delivery for you. Where do you want it?" "What the hell is this?" I asked, thoroughly confused. "The car. It's from Mr. Ramon Duarte. Is there room in the garage?" The delivery guy explained. The spot in the garage where Ella's Volvo used to be was empty. I pointed in that direction and nodded, still trying to wrap my head around what was happening. I noticed Kaylee put her hand to her mouth and giggle. I wasn't sure, but I think she was amused by my bewilderment. 5 minutes later, I was standing in front of a shiny orange sports car, a stark contrast to my outdated Volvo. "What the hell is this?" I repeated, incredulous. With great pride, the courier said, "This is a 2008 Lamborghini Gallardo Spider, Superleggera model. Isn't it the most beautiful thing you've ever seen?" Kaylee could barely contain her laughter. She wasn't loud, but she was definitely enjoying herself. I signed the shipping form, watching the courier in his fancy uniform leave. I had no idea what I was going to do with this extravagant gift, but I knew I wasn't taking it to New York. "Get in the Volvo, little Miss Funny Pants," I said, my guest still smiling as we pulled away from the driveway. I ordered a full rack of ribs and 2 Fosters at Dreamland. "Could you explain what's going on with the car?" I asked Kaylee, my curiosity piqued. "Ramon stocked up on winter wheat. Everyone thought he was crazy. When the price started to drop, he started doubling contracts. In less than a week, he made over $40 million. He was happy with the money, but he was thrilled with the comments he received about his smart move," she explained. "Well, good luck to him. I hope he didn't mention my name," I said, concerned. "He wanted to pay his respects to you, but not without your consent. He thanked me for bringing you to the party and asked for your address. However, I didn't know he was going to do that," Kaylee clarified. The ribs arrived, and I watched mesmerized as Kaylee dipped a few of them in Tabasco and then got down to business. God, I love that girl. "You know I'm going to send it back in the morning, don't you?" I said, certain about my decision. "That's what I thought. Don't worry about it," she replied with a reassuring smile. "Ramon won't take offense," Kaylee reassured me. "He would have gladly offered you the money, but he probably figured you'd refuse. That way, you'll feel more obligated to keep the money." We had to order a few more beers because of the Tabasco, which added a fiery kick to the evening. I felt good, and the last thing I wanted was to go home. At that moment, I would have given anything to spend the night in bed with this beautiful young vixen. I envied the suave, debonair guys who could get anything they wanted, the ones who could charm any girl in the world into bed in 5 minutes. The best I could hope for was a goodnight kiss. We couldn't talk all night, so eventually I was forced to go home. However, the next morning was wonderful. All my worries were in vain. As soon as we entered the house, Kaylee took me by the hand and led me to the bedroom. Being a true gentleman, I made sure her needs were met first. As a reward, I experienced the best night of my secluded life. Breakfast in bed consisted of juice, coffee, and Danish pastries. "I'm sorry, but under the circumstances, it's the best I can do," I apologized. "He's as good as I could have hoped for," she said with a smile. Trying to eat off a tray in bed proved to be very uncomfortable. After a few giggles and rearrangements, we retreated to the kitchen. Breakfast in bed sounds neater than it is. "Kaylee, I don't want to spoil the mood, but I'm really curious as to why you chose me. I don't have much to offer, and you deserve so much," I admitted. "I've been burned many times by slick, debonair boy lovers. I won't fall into that trap again," she replied. "Ah, I see. So you're attracted to me because I'm not a trickster or a debauchee?" I asked, amused. Kaylee laughed a little. "Gary, I was impressed with the deal you made with James in New York. I just sold some coins. Not that it's silly, but I found your proposed agreement to purchase trust land intriguing," she interrupted. "Do you consider me a philanthropist?" "Oh, not at all. I see you as a cunning bastard who took advantage of a unique situation to mess with his wife's lover," she teased. Of course, this brought a smile to my face. I was amazed at how smart she was and how well she hid it. "Was that wrong?" I asked. "No, Gary, that was brilliant. I was impressed and wanted to know more about you. You couldn't possibly know what I was doing in New York." "I knew what you did, but I didn't find out the reason until days later," she said with a twinkle in her eye. You were checking up on me? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Of course, I'm not a fool, Kaylee replied with a playful smile. I had to admit, the boost in self-esteem was refreshing. Unfortunately, Kaylee was taking an early morning flight back to New York. I hated to see her go, but she left me with a happy heart and the key to her apartment. The Lamborghini dealer couldn't come to collect the car until the next day, but that was okay because I wasn't planning on driving it. The movers arrived with a small truck and picked up my belongings for the move to New York. Terry Davis called with some startling news. Keystone Development was in serious financial trouble. It seemed that Jake had mysteriously lost almost all his supporters overnight. There were even rumors that some people were collecting markers Jake had not yet received. That evening, I received an unexpected visit from my almost ex-wife. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? I couldn't refrain from a touch of sarcasm. I need to talk to you about some things, Ella said, looking somewhat uneasy. I'm leaving in a few days, but I'll help you in any way I can, I responded. I was going to take my old Volvo, but I noticed it was gone. What's that orange car in the garage? She asked, her curiosity piqued. Things were starting to get interesting. I'm sorry, Ella. When you said you didn't want your old Volvo, I sold it back to the dealer. He may still have it if you want to check it out. Shit. I'd never heard Ella use that term before. The orange car was a gift, but I'm going to return it tomorrow anyway. I can't imagine myself driving something like that. The sticker on the window said $225,000. Who would give you a gift like that? Your new girlfriend, she asked, suspicion in her voice. No. It was a cattle rancher from Argentina that I helped a few weeks ago. It was just to show his gratitude. So what else can I do for you? I asked, shifting the focus back to her. There was a pause in the conversation. I realized that Ella wanted to say something, but didn't know how to do it. Would you like something to drink? I have beer and diet sodas, I offered. No, I can't stay long, she replied. How did you even get here? I don't see a car, I asked, puzzled. I took a cab, she explained. Gary, you said you were leaving in a few days. Is it okay if I stay in the house for a while? The house is sold. We closed the deal yesterday, and the new owners will move their stuff in this weekend, I informed her. They're letting me stay until Friday, but that's it, I informed her, hoping to avoid further confrontation. What's wrong with the apartment by the river? I asked, genuinely curious about her situation. She didn't answer, creating a brief lull in the conversation. Then she asked, what happened to the money you got for the house? Things were getting really interesting now. I was starting to like that the conversation was getting on the right track. It's all gone. You clearly said you didn't want anything. The money I had, I used to set up a new apartment for my move. Where are you moving to? She inquired. New York. I got a promotion and a big raise. I should be there on Monday. I wasn't going to tell Ella that I was going to live with Kaylee. I also wasn't going to tell her about the bank account in the Caymans. You never told me what happened to the apartment, I reminded her, trying to steer the conversation back to her predicament. It was only leased. The lease expired, and the owner didn't want to renew it, she explained. Where do you live now? I asked, feeling a bit more empathetic. We're staying at the Holiday Inn until Jake picks up a new place, she admitted. Oh, I see. Now I understood why she wanted to move into our old house. Ella looked a little confused. She wanted to ask for help, but she didn't know how to approach it. I realized she was in trouble. There was another lull in the conversation. Is there anything else I can do for you? I offered. Could you give me a ride to the Holiday Inn? She asked, sounding defeated. The first half of the trip went smoothly. Then she broke the silence. I understand you have a girlfriend. Tell me about her. She's not really a friend, but more of a business partner, I said, choosing my words carefully. What kind of business? You're not doing any business, she said skeptically. You're right. I'm just a grocery store clerk. I can't fool you, can I? I admitted, smiling. Ella was silent. She was looking out the window, and I heard her whisper to herself, Bastard! This was the moment when I could vent all my frustration. It was the perfect opportunity to let her know how much the pictures in the papers hurt me, but instead, I just smiled to myself. She was in a bad way, and I redeemed myself by being there for her, if only for a short while. I felt a twinge of guilt for a moment, but it passed quickly, replaced by a sense of closure. I dropped her off at the motel entrance, and she left without looking back or saying goodbye. I hated to admit it, but I felt a sense of satisfaction as she walked away. The week was shaping up nicely. Thursday morning, I unexpectedly received the final divorce papers. They arrived earlier than I had anticipated, but who was I to complain? On the front page of the Huntsville paper was a picture of Kaylee Rothberg arriving at the airport, holding hands with your sincere friend. A copy of the newspaper is delivered free to each room at the Holiday Inn, so Ella would undoubtedly see it at breakfast. I was sure Jake would explain to her who Kaylee was, adding another twist to their tangled web. I emptied the safety deposit box at the bank. My 7 precious pennies would come in handy in the near future. I had thought Kaylee might ask about them while she was here, but she never broached the subject. All our conversations were strictly social. If she was interested in me for business reasons, she never let on. I set a buy-it-now price on all the coins in the auction, and more than half of them sold at that price. I spent the rest of the day packing up the sold coins and preparing them for shipment. The remaining auction items had to close by noon on Friday. If all the PayPal payments went through, I planned to mail all the coins the same day. Any unscrupulous buyers would have to wait until Monday. Early Saturday morning, I was on my way. Most of the money from my PayPal account was transferred to my Cayman account, though I left a small amount on PayPal in case I saw something I just had to have. The people who bought the house drove up just as I was leaving, making it a win-win for both of us. The trip north would take about 12 hours with no delays. Kaylee was at the apartment, promising to prepare a home-cooked dinner for my arrival. I wondered who would actually cook it. It was good to know that I was still man enough to win the heart of such a beautiful woman. I had no doubt that I could fulfill all her expectations. I was just crossing the Virginia state line on Interstate 81 when Cindy called. It seems Jake Manning had skipped town, leaving Ella with no car, no place to live, no money, and a hefty motel bill. I asked Cindy what she thought I should do. She laughed and replied, "Smile.